It all started on the first warm weekend of spring, one of those rare Saturdays when everything finally felt like it was turning around. After months buried under snow and work stress, I had finally packed up the truck, tossed my fishing rods in the back, and headed to my secluded cabin in the hills. 2 hours outside of the city, no cell service, and nestled right along a crisp pine-fringed lake. This was my escape. It wasn't anything too fancy. A sturdy 2-bedroom log structure built by my grandfather back in the 70s, upgraded here and there by me and my dad over the years. No HOA, no prying neighbors, just peace. At least, that's what it used to be. I pulled into gravel drive around 8 a.m., steam from my travel mug swirling in the still cool air. The sun hadn't even burned off the lake fog yet. I opened the cabin, kicked up the windows, and turned on the old generator out back. Inside still smelled like cedar and last winter's firewood. Everything was exactly how I'd left it, until I walked out front and saw a folded yellow note wedged into the doorframe. You are in violation of community quiet hour codes and lakefront compliance expectations. What? There were no community codes out here. This wasn't some gated suburb. My property sat on a private patch of land I inherited years ago, legally owned, registered, and free from any formal development. There were some other cabins scattered around the lake, sure, but most were seasonal, and nearly all were owned by people like me, regular folks looking to escape the city. Then I noticed a signature at the bottom of the notice, Regional HOA Liaison Karen Blakesley, and right beneath it, Pleasant Pines Community Enforcement Division. I felt my jaw clench. I'd heard the rumors. Apparently, a recently formed HOA from a new subdivision a few miles up the road, Pleasant Pines, had begun expanding their oversight zone around the lake. They'd built a new cluster of cookie-cutter homes on the north side of the ridge, and their board had elected a woman named Karen Blakesley as their self-proclaimed enforcer. She was known for walking around with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset, snapping photos of driveways, lawns, boats, and even dogs. No one really paid her any attention out here, until now. Over the next few days, things escalated fast. By Sunday afternoon, I received 3 more bogus notices shoved under my door. One said I was operating an unapproved outdoor heating unit, my fire pit. Another said my fishing equipment storage box, a metal lockbox beside my dock, was an eyesore. The third actually had the audacity to say I was creating environmental disturbances by operating watercraft without HOA registration. That last one made me laugh, until I saw her. From across the lake, maybe 2 or 3 lots over, I spotted a platinum blonde bob in a neon pink windbreaker, standing near the shoreline, holding binoculars, writing on a notepad. She was literally surveying the lake like it was a military operation. I didn't even realize someone had built a new lake house on that side, but apparently Karen had moved in. I should have ignored it. I should have packed up and driven home. But I've never been one to be pushed around, especially not by someone who thinks rules are weapons and clipboards are power. I called up my friend Alex, retired sheriff's deputy and weekend war buddy, and told him everything. He laughed at first, thinking it was just some HOA busybody throwing her weight around. But when I showed him the notices and the supposed violations, his tone shifted. "She's got no authority over this property," he said, folding the paper. "None. And if she's stepping foot over your boundary line, that's trespassing." The line was drawn. The next weekend, I returned to the cabin with Alex in tow, this time with trail cams set up in the woods, posted legal boundary signs, and even a copy of my original deed laminated and mounted beside the front door. We were going to document every single time she crossed the line. What we didn't expect was a full-blown drama that unfolded the following weekend. We had just finished grilling some burgers out by the dock when we heard tires screeching up the gravel. A silver SUV, blaring some HOA-branded Magna on the side, came barreling toward us. Out stepped Karen Blakesley herself, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her forehead, and a walkie-talkie clipped to her belt like she was coordinating a hostage negotiation. She didn't even say hello. "You are in violation of multiple regional housing codes," she barked, walking straight up to the porch without asking permission. "And you've ignored every single notice. I have every right to take administrative action." "What action?" I said calmly, stepping in front of her. "This isn't your jurisdiction." "Oh, really?" She sneered, waving her phone like a badge. "Because I just called the sheriff's department, and I told them you're resisting inspection." "You're not law enforcement, lady," Alex chimed in from the steps. "And unless you have a warrant or a badge, you're trespassing. Step off the porch." Karen blinked, startled for a second, then doubled down. "I have the authority of the HOA." Alex stepped forward slowly. "I was the sheriff of this county for 12 years. You don't have authority over anything here, but maybe your cul-de-sac." Karen stormed off in a huff, slamming her car door so hard it shook the windshield wipers. But before she left, she shouted, "You will regret this." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 nights later, I was inside the cabin with my guest, my cousin Maya, a junior defense attorney visiting from Chicago, when we heard glass shatter. The front door burst open like a battering ram. Karen, yes, Karen, had literally smashed the door open with a crowbar in hand, shouting, "You're under citizen's arrest." It was so surreal, I stood frozen for a second, until Maya calmly stepped forward, holding up something in her hand. That was the moment Karen realized she'd made a serious mistake, and the moment everything started unraveling fast. After Karen's first screaming visit ended with a warning to expect serious consequences, I assumed, naively, that her bark was worse than her bite, that maybe, just maybe, she was just blowing steam because she didn't like being told no. But the next few days made it clear this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. It started subtle. Every morning around 8 a.m., a gray Subaru Outback would creep slowly down our dirt driveway and idle near the property edge. Sometimes it would linger for a full 5 minutes before reversing out. I caught it twice on my trail cam and recognized Karen in the driver's seat. One morning, she even had a clipboard. Then came the violations. Not from the HOA, because we weren't in their jurisdiction, but from the local township office. At least, that's how they appeared. My mailbox filled with letters on what looked like official stationery, unpermitted use of outdoor structures, illegal occupation of non-primary dwelling, unregistered short-term rental activity. At first, I was stunned, but then I noticed the formatting errors. The township name was misspelled on one. The case number formatting didn't match actual code. And a simple phone call to the county clerk's office confirmed it. The documents were completely fake. Someone was forging municipal citations and trying to intimidate me. I was angry, but still trying to stay calm. "Babe," my wife said one night, flipping through the fake citations, "this is harassment." I agreed, but I also had a theory. Karen clearly wasn't working alone. This level of paperwork and effort meant she either had help or she had completely lost it. I installed 2 more motion-sensitive trail cams and connected them to a local network, so I could monitor remotely from my phone. We even replaced the cabin's main door with a reinforced steel core unit and smart deadbolt. My wife joked we were prepping for a zombie invasion. I told her I was prepping for something worse, a determined Karen with a vendetta. The breaking point came the following Saturday. We'd invited a couple of friends up to the cabin. My wife's co-worker, Jasmine, and her partner, Greg, were planning to stay the weekend. They were both ex-military, smart, measured, and not easily rattled. Jasmine had done 2 tours overseas as military police. She'd seen far worse than HOA Karens in her time. We were on the back porch grilling steaks, music playing, enjoying a perfect golden hour across the lake, when it happened. Boom, boom, boom. 3 heavy hits at the front door, like someone was kicking it with full force. Then screaming, "You are trespassing on HOA property. Open this door." We froze. Greg reached for his phone. I ran to the front. Outside, Karen was in full meltdown. She wore what looked like a navy blue pseudo uniform, complete with shiny badge-shaped emblem on her chest that read Community Code Enforcement. "I told you," she barked, red-faced and breathless. "I gave you fair warning. You're under citizen's arrest for refusing to comply with subdivision code." She wasn't alone. 2 teenage boys, maybe 17 or 18, stood behind her recording on their phones. One of them, her son, I presumed, was laughing. The other kept saying, "She's really doing it. She's actually doing it. I opened the inner security panel and spoke through the camera mic. Karen, leave. Now. You're trespassing. She pointed at the door. You have 30 seconds to comply, or I will breach the threshold and detain you for township inspection. Lady, you're not law enforcement, I said calmly. You're breaking and entering. And then she actually did it. She stepped back, grabbed what looked like a tire iron from the teen's hand, and smashed the door right at the deadbolt line. The first hit dented the outer casing. The second cracked the frame. But the third? That's when it happened. The door didn't budge, but Jasmine exploded out the side entrance like a storm. She came around the corner with a calm, deliberate posture. No yelling, no threats, just that deadly cool that military police carry when they've had enough. Ma'am, she said, stepping up to Karen, you just committed a federal crime. Karen swung the tire iron again toward the door, but Jasmine caught it midair and twisted from her grip. Then she showed her badge. Not some cosplay HOA badge, a real federal identification. Named Sergeant Jasmine Ortega. I'm with the State Emergency Response Reserve, and you just tried to break into a federally protected dwelling under pretense of arrest. Congratulations. Karen's face drained white. The teen stopped laughing. Greg walked out behind Jasmine, holding a phone. We've got all of this on camera, he said. You're done. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but then she saw the drone. I'd launched at the moment I saw her outside. It hovered 30 feet overhead, recording every move, including the moment she raised a tire iron. She tried to turn away, muttering something about citizen enforcement and community code, but Jasmine wasn't having it. You're staying here until the sheriff arrives, she said, standing between Karen and her car. Karen panicked. She sprinted toward the gray Outback, but Greg had already stepped in front of it. Now she was trapped between two veterans who knew the law, had cameras rolling, and had every legal right to detain her until police arrived. 10 minutes later, the sheriff's deputy rolled in. He took one look at the footage and read Karen her rights on the spot. She was handcuffed, loaded into cruiser, and placed under arrest for attempted burglary, impersonation of an officer, and destruction of private property. But it didn't stop there. Turns out those two teenagers had posted their video to TikTok in real time with the caption, "My mom just tried to arrest a guy at his cabin LOL." By morning, it had over 100,000 views. And with that virality came exposure. Journalists called. A local station aired the footage. People started asking, who is this woman pretending to be law enforcement and smashing doors? But what they didn't know yet was that this Karen had done this before. And this time, the person she messed with had a guest who wasn't afraid to shut it all down. Because while Karen sat in a holding cell that night, Jasmine and I were just getting started. The fallout, the lawsuit, the HOA's meltdown, that's what comes next. It had only been 3 days since the door-smashing fiasco, and already the cabin was turning into a war zone disguised as a peaceful lakeside retreat. What once echoed with the sound of loons and the gentle knock of pine branches against the windows now felt like a siege bunker. Except, in this case, the enemy was a foreign power. It was an entitled woman named Karen, who thought her clipboard was more powerful than the Constitution. Karen hadn't been seen since her screaming fit, but her absence was more terrifying than her presence. The silence hinted she wasn't done, just reloading. But I wasn't unprepared this time. Not after the way she kicked my cabin door open like she was in a low-budget action movie. I had filed a formal criminal complaint with the sheriff's office. More importantly, though, my guest had taken matters into his own hands, and what he brought to the table would change everything. You see, my guest wasn't just some friend I invited for fishing and bourbon. His name was Reggie, and while I had casually introduced him as an old Army buddy, what I hadn't said was that Reggie was a federal agent with Homeland Security. He wasn't on vacation. He was on mandated leave after testifying in a major trafficking case. He needed a quiet place to lay low and decompress, and I'd offer my cabin. That was supposed to be the end of it. But now that Karen had forcibly broken into the property, pushed a city-issued violation into our faces, and made wild claims about civilian arrest authority, Reggie decided it was time to open the playbook, and not the one they teach you in HOA meetings. "You still got those trail cams up?" he asked me the next morning as we sat on the back deck. Of course. I never took M down since that bear tore through the garbage last fall. Good. We're going to review all of it. I want to see if she's been snooping around before the break-in. 2 hours later, we were in my living room, surrounded by monitors and footage. Sure enough, Karen had made multiple uninvited appearances before her little dramatic performance. She'd walked the edge of my property line 3 times over the past 2 weeks. One time, she actually leaned over the fence with her phone out, filming into my windows. But the biggest shock came from a 4 a.m. clip. Her mother, whom we hadn't seen yet, sneaking onto my dock with a flashlight. "Looks like we're not just dealing with Karen," Reggie muttered. "This one's a family operation." He wasn't kidding. The footage showed the woman pry at my dock's edge, try to remove the small private property sign I'd nailed into the post. Reggie flagged the footage and sent it straight to the sheriff's department, along with a formal affidavit he wrote himself. Within 48 hours, Karen and her mother were both under official investigation for trespassing, vandalism, and attempted theft of signage. But it didn't end there. That same evening, a certified letter arrived at my cabin. Inside was a notice from the HOA Legal Committee demanding a mandatory conflict resolution hearing at their community center, scheduled for the very next day. "They want to mediate this?" I scoffed. "No," Reggie replied. "They want to trap you in a room, outnumber you, and try to shut you up. I've seen this play before." We went anyway. But this time, we weren't going in blind. Reggie wore a wire. I brought printouts of every local ordinance, state trespassing statute, and 2 binders filled with photographic and video evidence. My neighbor Dan even agreed to tag along as a witness. The hearing was exactly what we expected. 8 smug HOA board members in a conference room trying to look official behind plastic name placards. Karen was there, naturally, seated at the center like some kind of suburban warlord. Her mother sat beside her in sunglasses, as if this were a mafia film. "Mr. Carson," the chairman began, "we are here to address serious concerns raised by Ms. Karen regarding violations of community regulations." I leaned forward. "And which community is that exactly? Because I live on private property not zoned or deeded into your HOA charter." A pause. The chairman cleared his throat. "Well, Ms. Karen claims. I have video evidence of her breaking into my cabin and her mother trespassing on my dock." That shut everyone up. I reached into my bag and began laying out copies of the sheriff's report, photographs of the damaged doorframe, and time-stamped footage stills. Karen went red. Her mouth opened to speak, but Reggie beat her to it. "You should also be aware," he said calmly, "that this meeting is being recorded for legal documentation, and any further claims against Mr. Carson without jurisdiction could constitute harassment and defamation." The chairman's eyebrows nearly fell off his face. "And who might you be?" he asked nervously. Reggie smiled. "Federal agent, off duty, temporarily residing at the property in question." From that moment on, the mood shifted like a thunderstorm rolling in. The board realized they weren't dealing with a scared cabin owner anymore. They were up against the law. Karen stood up and tried to storm out, only to be told by the chairman to sit down or be removed. The hearing ended with a formal withdrawal of Karen's complaint, but that wasn't good enough for me or Reggie. We wanted this shut down permanently, and we had a plan. Using the Public Records Act, we requested HOA financials, and what we found was gold. Karen had been using HOA funds to issue private legal complaints on her own behalf. She'd written off her personal security cameras as community surveillance and expensed over $4,000 in legal fees related to property access disputes. We took it all straight to the city's Housing Commission and filed a formal whistleblower complaint. Within 2 weeks, an audit was launched. Karen was suspended from the HOA board. Her mother was cited for trespassing, and the HOA was ordered to refund thousands in improperly used funds back to the homeowners. But the final blow hadn't landed yet. One morning, as I stood on my porch watching the sun rise over the lake, Reggie came outside holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Remember when I said we needed to take away their power completely?" he asked. "Yeah. Well, I made a call. Turns out your cabin and the surrounding shoreline sits on what used to be a community access easement, but the deed expired 15 years ago. The HOA never renewed it. I blinked. Meaning that the HOA technically has no legal access to this side of the lake anymore. He grinned. You own the only viable shoreline, and their dock is technically on your property. The next day, I called a land surveyor and a property attorney. What we confirmed blew my mind. Karen's precious lakeside dock, used by the HOA as communal marina, was 5 feet over the expired easement line. It was mine, and I was about to make sure they never use it again. If there was a moment in life when the universe pauses to offer someone one last chance to back down, Karen blew right past it like a freight train with no brakes. By the time my guest, Officer McAdams, finished identifying himself, every single person on the cabin porch had fallen silent, except for Karen. That woman stood frozen like she'd walked face first into a brick wall of reality, but still tried to pretend she was right. "You're lying," she snapped, pointing her shaking finger at McAdams. "You can't be a real officer. You don't have jurisdiction here. This is private HOA property. I know the law." McAdams remained calm, but his body shifted slightly. He had that quiet, deliberate posture that veterans carry like a second skin. "Ma'am, I am a federally commissioned officer with cross-jurisdictional authority through mutual aid agreements. And since you broke into this man's home, I'm now informing you that you've likely violated multiple laws, including criminal trespass and destruction of private property." That's when I noticed something important. Karen was no longer standing on her own authority. She started glancing around, desperate for someone to back her up. But guess what? All her so-called HOA enforcers were standing by the driveway, mumbling among themselves. Not one of them moved an inch to defend her. Even Steve, the block captain with the power trip clipboard, was slowly stepping backward like the ground beneath Karen had suddenly turned radioactive. "I was only enforcing HOA bylaws," Karen stammered. I stepped in, calmly now that I had the law on my side. "You smashed my door open, without a warrant, in front of witnesses and security cameras. You tried to place me under citizen's arrest over some nonsense about unauthorized siding color. But you didn't expect my guest to be law enforcement, did you?" Her face dropped. McAdams looked her dead in the eye. "Let me guess. This isn't the first time you've tried to impersonate authority in this community, is it?" She didn't answer. The mood shifted completely. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't feel like a victim of her HOA harassment. I felt like someone holding a sword of justice, and the blade had just landed. McAdams pulled out his radio. "Dispatch. This is Officer McAdams, badge 43712. I'm currently at the perimeter of Willow Bend Lake Estates. I need local law enforcement assistance at this address for suspected property damage and unlawful entry. Suspect is on scene." Karen's voice cracked. Wait. Can't we just settle this here?" I shook my head. "You already made your choice when you kicked my door in. You wanted a legal escalation? Well, here it is." Then, almost like clockwork, the squad car rolled up. It took less than 10 minutes for a sheriff's deputy to arrive. Karen, who had been barking orders just an hour ago, now looked like a deer standing in the middle of a busy intersection. All her bluff, all her smug power, had evaporated under real authority. The deputy, cool-headed and efficient, walked up and asked for statements. McAdams provided his ID and badge, gave a clear timeline of events, and pointed to the destroyed cabin door. I handed over my security footage, which we had already queued up on my phone. The moment Karen rammed to the wooden doorframe with her fake HOA compliance citation, folder in hand played in crisp HD, the deputy raised an eyebrow. "Well, this makes things simple." Karen tried once more. "This whole neighborhood has gone to hell. People like him don't respect community rules. We have standards here." The deputy remained unimpressed. "Ma'am, whatever internal guidelines your HOA enforces, they do not override state law. You entered a private home without consent. That's a criminal act." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Can't we just handle this in-house? I'll pay for the door." But it was too late. She'd made it personal. She wanted to parade her authority in front of neighbors. She wanted the whole HOA to know that she ruled with an iron fist. And now she was going to show them something else entirely. The cuffs clicked. I'll never forget that moment. The same Karen who once pounded on people's doors over lawn lengths and holiday lights was now being gently placed in the back of a sheriff's cruiser. Her power trip had come full circle, and the community had a front row seat. But the fallout didn't stop there. 2 days later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. McAdams, myself, and 2 other cabin owners who'd been previously harassed gave testimony. Turns out, Karen had been operating way outside of her jurisdiction for months. She faked enforcement letters, made threats of liens she couldn't issue, and even tried to fine residents for excessive lake reflections from windows. The board, who had largely ignored complaint about Karen for years, suddenly acted like they'd never known her. Classic cowardice. But it didn't matter. Public opinion had shifted. And the final nail? I submitted copies of the sheriff's report and door repair receipts directly to the HOA's liability insurance, with a formal complaint citing their enabling of her row behavior. They were now financially liable too. A week later, I was contacted by the HOA's attorney. He wanted to settle the complaint amicably and offer to fully reimburse damages, cover additional legal expenses, and issue a formal apology from the HOA board. But I wasn't done yet. I want her removed from the board, I said, and I want every citation she's ever issued to be reviewed under actual legal counsel. It was silent on the line. That's the price, I repeated. 2 weeks later, Karen was formally voted out. Her home was hit with a cease and desist letter from the HOA itself, barring her from representing the association in any future capacity. Her fake fines were voided, her violations reversed, and her name? Now synonymous with the cautionary tale told at every board meeting. Don't be like Karen. I even had neighbors come up and thank me, some broad over casseroles. One older man from down the lake just stood on my porch and shook my hand, eyes wet with relief. She's been ruining this place for years, he said quietly. You gave us our neighborhood back. And I'll admit, there was a satisfying peace in watching her reign fall apart. But there was still one final twist. Apparently, Karen had been preparing to run for HOA president in the next board election, believing her authority needed to be expanded. She had campaign signs printed and everything. And after her arrest, a photo of her getting cuffed at the cabin, taken by none other than Steve, the clipboard guy, circulated online and went mildly viral on the local community subreddit. HOA tyrant arrested while enforcing fake rules, read one headline. The comments were brutal, but honest. And when I finally repaired the cabin door, this time with a reinforced metal frame and a hidden camera right above it, I hung a small wooden plaque next to it. It read, "You are now entering a Karen-free zone." We toasted that night on the porch, me, McAdams, and half the neighborhood, because it wasn't just about siding colors or noise complaints anymore. It was about standing your ground when entitled people try to turn rules into weapons, and making sure they learn the hard way that respect goes both ways. And Karen? She learned. The loud way. The courtroom was packed. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the county courthouse as the final day of the hearing began. The moment Karen and her so-called legal counsel shuffled in, looking exhausted, pale, and far less smug than they had been weeks ago, you could feel a shift in the energy. She no longer carried herself like a queen of suburban enforcement. Now, she looked like someone desperately trying to wriggle free from the mess she had created. My guest, Calvin, the off-duty state trooper she had assaulted at my cabin door, sat calmly beside me in a dark blazer, reviewing his notes. Next to him was a representative from the state attorney's office. The HOA board had distanced themselves from Karen weeks ago, throwing her under the metaphorical bus the minute real legal heat came down. The judge took her seat and glanced at the pile of documents, affidavits, and video evidence. What happened next wasn't explosive or loud. It was surgical. Karen's lawyer tried everything, arguing that she was acting in her official HOA capacity and that her attempt to detain Calvin had been justified because he had refused to comply with security check. But that crumbled fast. The judge asked why she had tried to arrest someone using a curtain rod and broken into a private cabin without law enforcement or a warrant. The HOA rules did not override criminal law, and she wasn't law enforcement. Then Calvin stood to give a statement. His voice was steady. No anger. No drama. Just facts. I was a guest, invited by the property owner. She didn't ask who I was. She assumed. Then she bashed the door in, hit me with a rod, and screamed that I was trespassing while I was wearing my badge clipped to my belt. This wasn't an HOA enforcement situation. This was criminal assault, trespassing, and unlawful entry. She never once contacted local law enforcement. The courtroom was silent. The video we submitted, taken from my Ring camera and Calvin's own body cam, played next. Karen's shrieking voice echoed across the courtroom speakers as she threatened to drag him to the HOA office and make an example out of him. At one point in the footage, she even said, "I don't care who you are. Around here, I'm in charge." That was the nail in the coffin. By the time closing arguments wrapped, Karen looked like she could melt through the floor. When the verdict came in, I'll never forget the way she blinked in disbelief. Guilty on criminal mischief, trespassing, and misdemeanor assault. The judge fined her $7,000 in damages for property destruction, specifically for smashing my reinforced wooden cabin door, and another $10,000 in punitive damages for assaulting Calvin. That was just the start. Civil suits were coming next, and the court made it clear the HOA had no liability protection to shield her. She had acted outside the scope of her authority, and her actions were hers alone. But here's where the real irony came in. Calvin's badge? It didn't just carry local weight. It carried state jurisdiction. Turns out, Calvin had recently been transferred into a new role, a state inspector with oversight authority for local enforcement bodies and housing regulatory compliance boards. Yep, Karen's file? It now sat directly within Calvin's jurisdiction. He wouldn't touch it personally, obviously, conflict of interest, but it would be reviewed. Every complaint she'd ever filed, every suspicious action she took as an HOA board member, every questionable fine, every verbal altercation, every neighbor she tried to intimidate. The case didn't just go away. It opened the door for a full-scale investigation. In the weeks that followed, Karen vanished from public life. Rumors swirled that she'd stepped down from the HOA for health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Her name had become radioactive. The board replaced her with a soft-spoken retired teacher who immediately began undoing the damage Karen left behind, revising policies, refunding improper fines, and sending letters of apology to residents she'd bullied. The cherry on top? A few months later, I got an envelope in the mail, an anonymous letter thanking me and Calvin for standing up to a tyrant. Inside was a photo of Karen's house with a big red "for sale" sign out front. Scribbled on the back was one line. Looks like she couldn't handle a neighborhood where the rules applied to everyone. Now life at the cabin is peaceful again. No random violations taped to my door. No insane visits from HOA vigilantes. Just trees, the smell of pine, and occasional crackling campfire. And Calvin? He still visits every couple of weeks. We grill steaks, fish off the dock, and joke about the infamous curtain rod arrest. But the biggest lesson came from what my wife said that night after everything was over. You don't have to scream or fight dirty to win. Just hold your ground, stay calm, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. She was right. Karen came charging at us with chaos and entitlement, convinced she could twist the world into her own little fiefdom. But in the end, it was her own hubris that tore it all down. And all it took to bring it crashing down? A guest with a badge, a camera, and a little thing called the law.